this. This is a picture of Mr. Stuart Passetti. Anybody here know Mr. Passetti? Yeah, what a great guy. And I was trying to think the other day, was it Peter Fonda? No, who's Peter Fonda's dad? Henry Fonda. He said, as his memory started to go, he said, names are up here, dates are down here. Well, the names are starting to go. But Mr. Stuart Passetti, about 15 years ago, he was making, he doesn't make them anymore, thank God I did it when I did. He knits cast nets by hand. It's almost, not a lost art, but it's almost lost. This is him throwing this net he made for me. So I brought this. I don't know how many of you have actually seen a handmade net? Anybody? Oh, good, we got a few. Yeah, come help me, Mary. Stop breaking. So this is an 8-foot mullet net. Why mullet? Size of the mesh. Decides what you, if you were doing shrimp, it'd be a bit smaller mesh here. And this is Dacron nylon. Careful, sissy. You want to ride? You want to see what the Minorcan walk was like? You got it? Is there a bus anymore? There. Oh, thank you. So about 15 years ago, Mr. Stewart made this net for me, hand knit this net in the traditional matter, but all with modern materials. PVC, you know, for the swivels, and nylon for the wrist rope, nylon here in the lead line, all nylon. It was just a beautiful piece of work. This is hung in my house ever since. This has never been in the water.
It's in her bedroom as decorative.
It will never go into the water. It will never. It got as close as it will ever get to water today, riding in the car with us. That's all right.
All right.
So, at the time this happened 15 years ago, I said to Mr. Stewart, because I was in grad school at the time, and I said, Mr. Stewart, wouldn't it be cool if we did some research and we were to, I'm using the, the queen we here, we were to knit a really historical net. And he looked at me like I had a horn growing out of my head. He said, are you crazy? Why wouldn't you use all this cool modern stuff? Well, then I met a man, Mr. Mike Usina. Any of y'all know Mr. Mike? Yeah, what a super guy. I love him and Miss Teresa. Just, you can't find better people on the planet. And he is, a master gardener, a master net maker, and just a heck of a nice guy. But he's really gotten into this net making and the whole history of it. So I went to him and I said, hey, Mr. Mike, let's knit a mullet net. And he said, sure, I'll do one for you, Sandie. I said, well, let's do a historical mullet net. And he went, wow, that'd be really awesome. Could we find the materials? I'm like, I've got the internet, I can find anything. Well, it's a little harder than that. And with natural materials, he's got this man can knit a mullet net in his sleep. I mean, you sit there and watch him, he's watching TV and just knitting. But with his research and my research, we came up, this is the first and last of its kind, because he said, congratulations, I will never do this again. And he's a super nice guy, and he's very happy to have done it. It's been a very great project for us to work on together.
Is it heavy?
It's
Their weights
a bit heavier.
It's heavier than the other one.
Yeah, but
Smells
not
good.
prohibitively so. But this is linen, 100% hand.
Twisted?
Yes,
And the weights are...
had to go to Egypt to find it. Who better? Linen. Think about it. Think about the pharaohs. Think about those scrolls and that skirt the pharaoh always had on. That was linen. Yeah, so they still make it the way they made it for thousands of years. So this is linen. We tried to find linen for this. Then we realized historically flax was the better, would have been the choice of Minorcans, because we wanted to be true to the Minorcans, the Minorcans who came here to New Smyrna and went on to New St. Augustine. So this is flax. The top portion, this is the swivel, and the bale they call it, is made out of cow horn.
You know who signed that?
Yes,
Oh, I didn't.
I
know
asked
that.
him to.
Oh, that's when he signed it.
Yeah.
that day.
And the lead weights on the bottom were like, well, let's think about that. What would they have used? And he said, well, you dummy, and he smacked me in the back of the head. They would have used lead, of course. And I thought, well, of course they would. You know, lead mining has been around for, thousands of years. But these particular weights are off. Minorcans are like Scots. They're thrifty as all. They don't throw anything away. These weights off the bottom, not a single one of them are from a Minorcan. They're all from Minorcan previous nets. And there's not a weight on it that's not at least 100 years old.
Wow.
Because I thought, why would we go to all this trouble historically and then put shiny new lead weights on there? That looks stupid. So that's kind of cool there. And I'm like, where are we going to get old weights? Mr. Mike put out the call, and everybody, the Minorcan community in St. Augustine, really, I didn't know how they would treat it. But they really embraced this project. They got excited about it. I finally showed it off the first time at the Merkin picnic a couple weeks ago, and they went kind of nuts over it. But the call went out, we need your old lead weights, the older the better. And we had more than we needed by the time it was done. So it has been thrown once. Mr. Uzina himself threw it. Then we took a picture of it. I can't spin enough to twist enough to throw one anymore, so I'll probably never throw it. But it has never been in the water. It will never go in the water, because this is not only, my heart, my family, but this is art, I think. It's art. I read a line the other day in a book, and I just thought it was a beautifully written line, a beautiful bit of prose, and it was the knowledge of joy in all things. And it reminded me of my great nephew, because he certainly is the knowledge of joy in all things. But it was also Mr. Uzina, when he knitted this net, and all his ancestors standing behind him. All those people who toiled here, who walked the road to St. Augustine, whose plantations were burned down, and they did it again. It was like he could feel them behind him when he was knitting this net, and it gave him just a great sense of accomplishment. He feels like I was part of it, because, I chased down the supplies and did the research, but I can't sew a button on, but this is a great deal. And I wanted to share with y'all, and now tell me, be honest, brutally honest, is that not the coolest show and tell you've ever seen? Yes! Thank you very much.
How many Minorcans stayed here?
All of them. No, stayed here, as in,
Didn't go to St. Augustine.
stayed here in New Smyrna. Actually, a small contingent stayed here with the priest because they were too ill to transport. They took them up a bit later. Either you got better or you died. That was medicine at the time. Now, some did come back to this area. Some went to Mayport. Some went out, a big bunch of them went out to Moccasin Branch, west of St. Augustine, St. Ambrose Parish out there. They started to spread out, and then we find them everywhere. But at first, everybody went.
Very good.
Yeah, everybody went.
So was their land here still available to them when they came back? No.
It was,
My
by the conditions of the legality of what Tunyon did, they forfeited any claim. Now, Turnbull spent the rest of his life here in St. Augustine. Finally, his fellow investors hounded him through the courts trying to get their money back. And he spent the rest of his life up in St. Augustine practicing medicine because he had to make a living and trying to get back his colonists, to get back to the dream. It never happened. He's buried in St. Augustine. Yes, sir. I'm not St. Augustine, South Carolina.
My ancestors came back about 3 or 4 years after the collapse, when it was under the Spanish control and was granted a Spanish land grant in the same area they worked at Turnbull Plantation.
Yeah, I don't know, my dad always said it's better to be lucky than smart. And I've argued with him about this forever, but at this point in my life, he's right. And the St. Augustine Minorcans worked hard, and they were lucky. They hit New Smyrna at a pretty decent time. It had its moments. But they hit St. Augustine perfect. They hit St. Augustine before the Revolutionary War pushes, the first part of the Revolutionary War is up north in the northern colonies, but the latter half is in the southern colonies. When the war moves south, all those loyalists who don't want to get blown up, shot, or conscripted, they escape down into Florida, and suddenly, but that's after the Minorcans have established themselves. They're up in the Minorcan quarter.
So my ancestors went to the Bahamas.
Okay? So, it's like anything else, because the Spanish, what did the Spanish require when they came back? What did the Spanish require? Two things.
They had a 2-year obligation to stay on the homestead for 2 years.
No, that's far as land, that's far as land grants.
Okay.
But just to stay in Spanish Florida, second Spanish period, there's 2 requirements.
Need to be Catholic?
Have to be Catholic or convert to Catholicism, and you have to swear loyalty to who?
To the Spanish king.
The Spanish king, yeah, the Spanish king. And the British, leave wholesale, but who stays behind? The Minorcans do. Now, do the Minorcans love the Spanish king?
Yeah.
But how many times are you going to move in a lifetime? Holy cow. And with all these people gone, things are looking pretty good. All that, think about it, St. Augustine, before the latter half of the Revolutionary War, 1777, the Minorcans show up in St. Augustine, and there's less than 2,000 people living in the greater St. Augustine colonial area. And by the time you get to 1780, there's 20,000 people there. That's how many loyalists flooded in. And who's selling them venison and chicken eggs and Irish potatoes and stuff they've woven and stuff they've used their cast nets for? Yeah, they hit every place at the right time. They really do.
This has started nuts.
Okay.
This came up when I joined on Facebook the Minorcan, whatever it is, Culture Society.
Speak louder, please.
Okay, there's a Facebook page on Facebook.
There's a number of them.
Yes, and this is the Minorcan family or something.
Okay.
And I had taken some pictures of the canals around Florida, around New Smyrna, I'm sorry. And this one woman wrote me that that the Minorcans didn't dig any canals here. And I'm going, oh, I've been in them. What are you talking about? What is the big rift about canals here in New Smyrna? And this woman was from St. Augustine. So
I don't understand that attitude, except, I've been heckled. This has been, y'all are great, y'all are awesome, but I've been heckled and you don't know what you're talking about. People want to get into genealogical wars. You know how different groups of animals, it's like a school of fish, a flock of birds. A new one I just learned, it's a congress of baboons. Makes sense. I don't care which side you're on, it makes sense. I just said it makes sense overall. But I've decided that with Minorcans, we should refer to it as a disagreement of Minorcans. Because if you have more than one Minorcan in a room, what do you have?
An argument.
Yeah, you got an argument. And story about their history, whether they know anything about it or not. And like I say, I think a lot of that comes from the cultural indoctrination of, you know,
Grandpa.
yeah. I mean, my mother, if I walk into her living room right now and say, hey mom, hey dad, Turnbull, oh my God, they're throwing ashtrays at me. Oh, son of a, no. But it's like, mom, yeah, he was greedy, let's face it. He was unlucky, he was, you know. But the Minorcans, they hid on the boats. They snuck on in the night before they left the Mediterranean. You know, that's how bad things were there to push them out. So everybody was, you know, involved.
Back to the canals, I mean,
Oh,
you can't
why?
deny the canals are here.
No, just that they were forced to dig the canals, because one of the
They
canals
voluntarily got those stones out.
is historically known as the Women's
Yeah.
Canal.
The garden.
Oh, they made women's dig a canal. Well, I know from my historical research that for the Minorcan women I know, because I don't care who you are or what you say, the Minorcans are a matriarchal social group. The women run the world, and if you don't like that, that's fine. It doesn't change the fact that that's the way it is. But those women digging a canal is not at all surprising. And once again, what a remarkable feat. I don't know why it makes them angry.
I don't either, I mean.
But that is well, anybody can argue the history I presented, you know, to you with me. I encourage my students to argue with me. History is never finished. If you believe that it is, and that's how they taught you in high school. Here's the story, you need to learn the truth, carry it with you for the rest of your life. I would refute that argument with two words: Turnbull letters. Changed everything, didn't it? Changed everything. Changed their outlook, changed their understanding.
Could you briefly say what they are?
The Turnbull letters?
Yeah, 'cause I don't know.
A collection of letters that went back and forth between, they're called the Turnbull letters, it's just kind of convenient. Between Turnbull, Sir George Grenville, one of the big investors, various, Governor Grant had some letters in there. And it was some of the bills of lading, things they ordered, supplies, a lot of letters going back and forth. Why haven't you made me money? Why haven't we made any money? Here's why we're not making money. You know, so a lot of those stories from the whole time. And they're all written from the British, you know, landowner, people in charge perspective. There are no, except for the testimonies of the Minorcans in the depositions for Tonian, for their release from New Smyrna. They're all from other than that, they're from the British point of view, but there's a remarkable window into them. If you want to see them, read them. Go to Florida History Online. It's a web portal, a subdomain at the University of North Florida. Yay! That I had a great deal to do with when I was in school. And they are there in total. And you can read through them chronologically and see what was going on. Go to the projects page, and it's listed. It will tell you in the title. You're like, oh, that's what she's talking about. Crazy woman. Yes, ma'am.
They were just discovered.
Oh, it's been what, 10, 12 years ago now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Recent.
Yeah, oh, I mean, compared to all the rest of it, yes, yes, ma'am.
You alluded to something that I'd like you to explain to everybody in this room. What came out of Mahone that we take and put on a bacon, lettuce, and tomato sandwich?
Mayonnaise.
Yeah, but most people don't know that, and that's kind of a piece de resistance when I said it came out of Mahone.
Y'all are so proud of that mayonnaise. I'm a Miracle Whip girl, okay? Oh, man.
This.
Yeah, see, I've started another culture war. Yeah, I've started another culture war.
She's coming.
But
Yeah, but once again, if you want to preserve something in a place that has no refrigeration and you don't want to salt the heck out of it, Put some vinegar in it. Oh, look, mayonnaise, cool, let's have BLTs. Yes, sir.
Was there a priest that led the Minorcans from New Smyrna to St. Augustine?
Actually, there were two priests. The younger one went with the main body to St. Augustine. The older priest, Father Camps, the great Minorcan leader, spiritual leader, he stayed with the sick in New Smyrna and didn't come up until a couple weeks later.
So I was told in Minorca, on top of the mountain, there's a church and a memorial there of all the people that came to New Smyrna.
Have you been to the cathedral, the Catholic cathedral in St. Augustine? Okay, if you ever go, take a pilgrimage, because there's two really cool Minorcan things at the cathedral. If you're not Catholic, we don't make you eat a live goldfish on your first trip in. But if you go into the main portion of the church, you go through the main front doors, walk halfway down the aisle toward the altar, then stop and turn around and look at the back wall, because there are murals back there that tell the story of the Minorcans, because they're the ones that built that church. And in the side courtyard is a gorgeous statue that we just refinished a couple of years ago, so it's in excellent shape right now, of Father Camps and some of the Minorcans about him, and it has every family name on there, and it tells just a brief, blurb of tourist type blurb, that's short, about the Minorcans and about the importance of Father Camps to the Minorcan population.
From New Smyrna, he was from New Smyrna. He was from New Smyrna?
No, he was Minorcan himself.
No, but he
The
was
main
Minorcan,
statue-
but he's the one that brought them from New Smyrna.
He accompanied them.
Company.
Yeah. And, that whole thing, because once again, it's a British period, so what was the one thing you couldn't be in British East Florida?
Catholic.
Yeah. So how did Turnbull pull that off?
Great.
Yeah. Mr. Chamber of Commerce, money, Jesus, money, Jesus, which one weighs? That's the bottom line. I'm not being sacrilegious or mean, it's the bottom line.
Also language, Catalonian.
Yeah, but it's a melting pot from the get-go, because the first group that Turnbull brings in for the gathering in Mahone is 200 Italian bachelors. What is the first thing every one of them did? We're going to the New World, y'all. I need me a
Right.
Yes. So the melding of families, that mixture. So the one Segui I talked about on the survey, he's married to, Katie McBride. That's about as Irish a name as you can get. The mixing starts before they leave the Mediterranean.
Right.
So if you couldn't speak the language needed, somebody, next to you could. And Catalan survives into the 20th century. There were still some, total speakers who could converse in the language, the early part of the 20th century. And there's still lots of him. Mr. Mike Usino who knitted my net for me. Oh, he would never say anything mean, anything crude in English, but man, he'll curse you in Catalan.
That's a big issue.
And I don't know what he's talking about, but I know.
It's a big issue in Spain right now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is Catalan kind of a Spanish language? Is that
It's actually better related to Bourbon French, because if you remember, the Bourbon cousins kind of spread out, just like the not the Windsors, who was before them, just like the British families end up in all the royal families around Europe, because you can only marry somebody royal. The Bourbons got spread way out. So it's in the European, kind of the Indo-European language group as a whole. It's not like the Basque language in northern Spain, which is a total isolate. But they have a very long and proud history of holding on to that, to their culture and language.
So did the Minorcans bring the dado peppers, or was that something
No.
got heaters ventilated.
If my dreams come true, and I have very few of them, but one of them is to make millions of dollars on something I'm a part of, and to use a portion of that money to do a full genome study on the daddle pepper where we can solve this problem. Now, Mr. Mike Uzina, a master gardener as well as a master net maker, he's come closer to agreeing with me than anybody else. I think, how many of you have ever bitten into the real thing? A few of you, and almost all women. Weaker sex, I don't think so. So if you have been into the mouth of the fiery pits of hell, it's way on up there on the Scoville scale. It's Scotch bonnet hot. But I've traveled around the world. I have never had a taste like it. It's totally unique in its flavor. Heat, they're hotter, they're cooler. It's certainly way on up there. But we don't know for sure. I still think, because there was a lot going back and forth with the Catholic Church between Father Camps and the other priests that were at New Smyrna. They were communicating covertly with the Catholic Church in Cuba, in Spanish-held Caribbean. And I think, and they were trading rum and cigars back and forth back in those days too. I think somebody brought a pepper from the Caribbean, not necessarily from Cuba, but from the Caribbean, and crossed it with a Scotch bonnet. Now, can I prove that? No.
But it makes
There is
sense.
a natal, like Natal pepper from Africa.
The little tiny ones?
Yeah.
The little bitty baby ones, yeah. That's the closest I've been. Is that the closest you've been? And it could be that. Because think about the African influence.
Right.
Just food. Just food.
Yeah.
I mean, if you've ever been to New Orleans and had gumbo doesn't work without okra. That's East Africa. That comes straight from East Africa. And all that, it's a big old melting pot for food as well as language and culture and art and everything else. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Earlier, when you were speaking, you mentioned something about the shame of the Minorcans. Was that very common, of being an indentured servant on the plantation? Did you hear?
Was being indentured common?
Yeah, I mean, no, indentured was common, but the
Yeah.
Minorcans, were they ashamed of that indentured and didn't talk about it?
Were you aware of how deeply indentured servitude occurred throughout all of, especially North America?
Yes, I understand.
You were. How many of you were? Not so much. It's poorly taught. I've been stoned, because I have an, indentured servitude. We should all be proud, and I've been thrown out.
I want to add something to that.
Sure.
I grew up here in New Smyrna. I have Minorcan roots, and I thought my family, my father's family, and my aunt were the only Minorcans in New Smyrna. I was amazed at how many Minorcans have come out of, excuse me, the woodwork. All of a sudden, it's like everybody wants to be a Minorcan. And I grew up thinking I was the only little Minorcan black child in New Smyrna. And a lot of my schoolmates were
You just
Minorcan.
said something.
Yeah.
What did you just say? Repeat it again. That's okay,
A black child. I
Yeah,
was dark
okay.
complected, yeah.
because
Minorcan black.
what do you have to be an American?
White.
Merkin. You got, not American, American.
You're Merkin.
You gotta be white, don't you? And if you're not white, what are you?
You're black.
Colored.
You're less. Then you can fill in all the non-PC verbiage that makes you happy. But you're white. And what language do you speak? You speak American, And so if you are new, whether you're a Minorcan in 1770 whatever, or you're a Mexican that just crossed legally the border last year, what is your goal? To be accepted. I mean, don't you want to be accepted? Isn't that a human thing? You know? Jeez. And in order to be accepted in America, and like I say, a lot of people get angry with me, and that's fine. But I'm just talking from a social, cultural point of view. If you want to be accepted, I got adopted by Minorcans. I'm the whitest person I know. And before I had this lovely white hair I have now, I had flaming red hair. I don't mind the white so much, I just miss the red. My parents, who, I'd die for them. There's nothing I wouldn't do for them. They've been so good to me. Everything wonderful that's happened to me is because of them. But to their dying day, my dad, who's 90 years old, God love him, will refer to me as our one white grain of rice and a bowl of black beans.
Say it again. Say it again. Say that again. You said it so fast.
She wants to hear it again.
The one white grain of rice and a bowl of black beans. Black beans and rice, very traditional. Yeah. You know, we have to take our, I mean, I can hear my mother out fishing, you know. The first hour, great. Second hour, we're catching fish. Oh, look at this 200-pound tarpon. I'm so awesome. But by the time we get to the 10th hour, you know, I have sunstroke. I'm dying. You know,
And she's just browner.
yeah, Mom's up there playing. One time I got downwind from her when she was spraying on tanning accelerator. I was in the burn unit at, what is it, burn hospital up in Memphis? St. Jude's for a month. She almost killed me. You know, like, we have to take our white child inside now. It was like my shame that I couldn't take the sun. And it's like, it's that. That's another push me, pull me culturally. But if you live in a place like St. Augustine, why didn't you know there were 60,000 Minorcans 74 miles north of here?
Oh, I knew there were Minorcans. That's
Right,
because
okay.
we had family.
But I have taught Florida history in classrooms, college classrooms in St. Augustine. And community college, so you know you got some local, you got a room full of local people. And we always have Minorcan Week. Whether you like it or not, we're going to have Minorcan Week. You're going to read Pat Griffin's Mullet on the Beach, whether you like it or not. You're going to write a paper for me, because I'm a historian, and that's what you do. That's how we torture people. We make you write papers. And then we're going to have the Minorcan Cultural Society is going to come in and make us traditional Minorcan food on the last day. We're going to have a party. And it never failed to amaze me how many of my students would come up to me at the end of the week and say, "Oh, Professor Stratton, this was wonderful. My name is Amy Segee. I never knew I was a Minorcan. I asked my parents and they kind of looked down when they admitted it." I'm like, well, welcome to the new world, Mr. Columbus. But that's Ernest Hemingway once said, I thought it was one of the most brilliant things, of all the brilliant things he wrote, I thought it was one of the most brilliant things he ever wrote. And he said, St. Augustine, where he spent a lot of time, is the only place I know of where you can spend every day of your life except the first one and still be considered an outsider. That is true with the old families to this day. It is, but once again, think of those walls, think of that background, think of the society, think of religiously surrounded by family and godparents and cousins and all that kind of stuff. That website you were talking about, the Minorcan family, how do they all refer to each other? Welcome, welcome cousin. Because, you know, we don't know how far back it goes, how many generations, but we're cousins somewhere.
Yeah.
And you must always offer love. You must always offer a port in a storm, hospitality, a helping hand. If you got two people coming for the job and one's a Minorcan, who gets the job? Bam. Sorry, that's the way it is. And it's an insular community because regardless of what type of immigrant you are, when you're first getting established, where do you live? You live in the Minorcan Quarter. You live in Chinatown. You live in Little Italy. I'm sure if I throw the net out here, y'all could give me 12 more, quick, fast, and in a hurry. But where do they eventually go? Disseminating out into the suburbs or whatever. So whether it's in, I have friends in Europe and in Africa who speak 4 languages fluently. I'm not talking a few words. I mean fluent, just flip over back and forth. I have friends in Africa who speak 7 and 8 languages in their own country. So it's like, this is America, that we speak American here. So it's part of that transfer from insular, from the Merkin Quarter, from Chinatown, out to the North River. Oh, look at me, now I have, because Rocco Leonardi with his red and green doors and sashes has a 2.5-story house. And what's the best real estate in St. Augustine in 1738? Where's the finest, fanciest place you can live?
On the waterfront?
No, that's 20th century thing.
Okay. Further in.
On the square.
Oh, like
Yeah.
in Spain.
Church is right there. Aunt Martha lives over there. Here's the market. Right here. And everybody has to come to the market. They see my house. They walk by it. They see what I've accomplished, what I've done. Everybody goes to church. They walk by my house. They see me coming out to go to church with them. It's those steps and stages, that movement out to the beach. So today we think of the beach as someplace, I call it the valley of the shadow of the conquistadors. You couldn't pay me to live out on the beach, just for the wise man builds his house on the rock. 1, 2, salt eats everything, and I can't be doing it. But beachside living as a status symbol is very modern, very recent. But I think a lot of people would, if it's not that, if it's not I got a house out at the beach, look at me. That's how it used to be on the square, on the downtown. Look at me. I'm, the center of this world. So what's the advantage of moving north? Because you can't farm downtown. So your plantations out there, but most of those people out there either kept houses in town, or they had very close family in town, or they had shops in town. Rocco Leonardi, one of the things he sued for in his Patriot War claim was his 150 wine vines, and for the amount of wine he could have made and then sold in St. Augustine, but he couldn't because he couldn't work his plantation. So in 1,000 different ways, that's a very valuable area, but in none of the ways the people living there now see it as. I mean, what do you grow at the beach if you're just growing flowers? It's difficult.
My father came, I keep saying came back to New Smyrna. He was born in Mayport and came to New Smyrna to work on the railroad. And he always said, I could have bought a whole acre of land over there in the beach for $200.
Right.
But what you gonna grow on it?
Yeah.
So we bought a house, 2 houses from the railroad track. And there I'm stuck.
My daddy, you're killing me. So, and the reality today is that area up there where those Minorcans were living, there's about 4 Minorcans up there nowadays, and they're really wealthy. Good for them. But you have to be to be able to afford the tax rate in that area. And so a lot of those old Minorcan homesteads, have gone by the wayside, not only through death and inheritance, but just because you can't afford the taxes anymore. You can't afford the taxes. One of my when my grandfather, my adopted grandfather, stops running I don't know, gambling casinos, brothels, rum to the Caribbean. Oh my God, he was a reprobate. God love him. But when he finally fell in love with this young woman from Georgia, she wasn't putting up with all that foolishness. So she had to have a house, and he had to cease and desist. He had to be a good Catholic boy again. He had to cease and desist with any illegal type activities. Well, and he had to stop dressing like a pirate, and dress like a grown man. So he went out and bought 30 suits with his ill-gotten gains, and he bought a house on the bayfront, which he was proud of until the day he died, because look where he's living. You know, so yeah, he's on the water, but it's not because he's going to make more money. Although if you roll back the rug in the dining room and open up the trap door, you can go down and see the collection of old rum bottles.
Ours was up there.
Up there, okay. You know, everybody's got their spot, just where is it? But, you know, when times are hard, the rules become somewhat more flexible. But, and he was very proud of that. And he was very proud of the fact the house was made of coquina. Because what is coquina to the Minorcans? It's the sacred stone, isn't it? So what gets taken, what survives, the language, no. Not hardly very much at all. But, you know, you can still get some fiery daddle peppers, and, you know, you can go to Aunt Kate's and eat, you know, purloo, you know, every daggum day. They've got, you know, Minorcan dishes, and you can have Minorcan clam chowder about anywhere in town. So some things survive. And I think at first, what people find attractive is what survives. And then when that group survives and grows out of the Minorcan Quarter or Chinatown, it's what is successful is to a great extent what goes with you. Because if you're not going to be successful and you're just going to go down in flames, what's the point? So what do you take out of Chinatown with you? Used to only get Chinese food in Chinatown. Where can you get Chinese food now?
Anywhere.
Everywhere. One of the best plates of Chinese food I ever had was in Costa Rica, up in the mountains. There was nothing but banana plantations in this Chinese restaurant in the middle of nowhere. It was great. Any other questions?
Let's wrap it up. Join me in.
What a great crowd. No bad fruit.
Fantastic presentation and discussion afterwards. I'm glad we were able to be here and participate in it. Thank you so much for joining us.